There is a woman in the Bible who officially should not exist, Cain's wife, and the question of where she came from has made millions of people close their Bible and never open it again. But by the end of this video, you're going to have an answer so precise that the next time an atheist, a confused pastor, or your own cousin throws this question at you during a family dinner, you will dismantle it in 30 seconds. No sermon, no invented theories, just the biblical text open in front of you. You're going to discover why Cain was afraid of people who supposedly didn't exist. You're going to see how he built an entire city for a population that officially wasn't there. You're going to do the math with numbers that have been written in the Bible for 3,000 years without anyone adding them up honestly. And you're going to understand why the question that destroys the faith of millions was refuted by Moses in the following chapter. Without raising his voice, without defending himself, just by writing a single line that almost nobody reads. But there's something you have to see before we get to the answer, because without this, everything else makes no sense. And it's in a scene you've probably read 100 times without noticing the detail that changes everything. Picture the scene. The sun falls vertical over the field. The ground still smells of fresh blood, of metal, of that thick mixture that only exists when life has just left a body. Cain is standing next to his brother's body. His hands tremble. His sandals are stained with damp, dark earth. His tunic has stains that will never come out, no matter how many times he washes it. And from some invisible place, a voice calls him by name. "Where is Abel, your brother?" The question lands like a stone. Cain already knows that God knows. But he answers anyway with the oldest lie in history. A lie that still comes out of human mouths today. The lie of the one who plays dumb after he's already been caught. "I do not know. Am I my brother's keeper?" What follows is a sentence. Curse. Exile. The land he worked so hard will no longer bear fruit for him. He will have to wander the world as a fugitive. And then he, terrified, says something few readers notice, something that goes unnoticed in thousands of sermons, but which, if you stop and read it carefully, completely destroys the theory of the four people in the world. Listen to this carefully, because here is the first crack, the first proof that the problem is not the text. The problem is how we read it. Cain looks at God and says, "Anyone who finds me will kill me." Wait, stop right there. Read that again. Anyone who finds me will kill me. Anyone, whoever, someone. Cain is afraid of being murdered by someone. But if only 4 people existed in the world, and one was already dead, and the other 2 were his parents, who was he afraid of? Who was that anyone? What anonymous multitude was he talking about? What strangers was he expecting to fall victim to? And God does not correct him. God does not say, "Relax, there's no one else." God does not say, "Son, you are the only human on earth besides your parents." On the contrary, God responds by taking Cain's fear seriously. He promises him a mark of protection. He warns that anyone who kills him will suffer 7-fold vengeance. Why? Because there were people, real, close, real enough to require a divine warning against them. Picture him fleeing, the mark freshly placed on his forehead, the weight of a crime on his shoulders, his feet kicking up dry dust as he walks away from his brother's body. Every shadow behind a rock startles him. Every sound in the brush makes him spin around. He walks east toward a place the Bible calls Nod, a Hebrew word meaning wanderer, vagabond. The name of the place is the sentence itself, and as he walks, he does not think about his elderly parents. He thinks about the others, about the strangers who will come looking for him. Right there, you already have the first proof, in chapter 4 itself, that the idea of the 4 people in the world does not fit the text. Cain himself confesses, without meaning to, that there were more people. And not only that, he was afraid of those people. which means that those people were close enough to find him, numerous enough to be a real threat, important enough for God himself to intervene to protect him from them. But we still haven't gotten to the strongest part, because there is a verse hidden in plain sight that completely destroys this confusion. And this verse is right in the next chapter, so close it almost slaps you in the face, so obvious that after you read it, you don't understand how no one ever showed it to you before. Now, before we go on, I'm going to ask you something very specific. If what I just showed you already changed something in the way you read Genesis, give this video a like. It's not for me. It's because this kind of content moves when the algorithm sees people reacting in the first few minutes. And there are people who need to hear this answer because they are about to lose their faith over a question that has a crystal clear answer in the Bible. Your like can reach them. Let's continue. Genesis 5 is one of the most skipped chapters in the entire Bible. Most people ignore it because it seems like a boring list of names and ages. Adam lived so many years, fathered such and such son, died. Seth lived so many years, fathered such and such son, died. And on like that for 10 generations. Almost every reader skims over it without stopping. They consider it filler information, genealogical data with no spiritual value. But hidden among those verses is a bomb, a single sentence, a short sentence, a sentence that answers in one blow the question that has confused people for thousands of years. The text says that after having Seth, Adam lived 800 more years, and during those 800 years, and here comes the key phrase, he had sons and daughters. Sons and daughters, plural, multiple, uncounted. Do you realize what this means? The Bible never said that Adam and Eve had only 3 children. The Bible mentions by name only 3, Cain, Abel, and Seth. But the text makes it clear, without ambiguity, without any possibility of misinterpretation, that there were many more, dozens, possibly hundreds over the course of centuries, and this is not a theory, it is not a speculation, it is not an apologetic invention, it is written, black on white, in verse 4 of chapter 5, right after the account of Cain and Abel, as if the text were answering your question before you even ask it. Why then do most people believe there were only 4 people? Because most people stop at the surface reading of chapter 4 and never move on to 5. Because the movies and the Sunday school cartoons showed Adam, Eve, Cain, and Abel as a family of 4 and nothing else. Because pastors in their rush only mention the 3 recorded names. Because no one taught you to read genealogy as living information, but as boredom to be skipped. And now comes the detail almost no one adds up. Adam lived 930 years. 930, not 90, not 130. 930 years of life. Eve, presumably, a similar amount. And the biblical text is emphatic about this. It repeats it generation after generation. Seth lived 912 years, Enosh 905, Kenan 910, Methuselah 969, the absolute record of human longevity in all of Scripture. Stop and think for a second. If a human couple lives nearly 1,000 years and starts having children when they're young and keeps having children for entire centuries, how many descendants do they produce? The question is not rhetorical. It is a question we are going to answer with real numbers. Let's do the math honestly. If Eve had a child every 5 years, during just 200 of those 900 years, that's already 40 children. 40 from a single couple. And half of them would be women. And those daughters, in turn, would also have children. And those children too. And those children too. And from there, the thing explodes mathematically, not in a linear way, in an exponential way. Think of it like this. If in the first generation you have 40 children, in the second generation, those 20 male children marry their 20 sisters, and each couple has 20 descendants. That's already 400. In the third generation, 200 couples having 20 children each. 4,000. In the fourth generation, 80,000. In the fifth, more than 1,000,000. And this is just in 5 generations out of the dozens that fit within Adam's 900 years. In less than 200 years after creation, there could easily have been thousands of people alive on earth. Brothers, sisters, nephews, nieces, cousins, grandchildren, great-grandchildren, great-great-grandchildren, all direct descendants of Adam, all sharing the same cosmic surname, humans made in the image of God, a gigantic family. A population growing without breaks, a humanity expanding across the earth century after century, while Cain, exiled, wandered through the eastern region. And here, right here, is the answer to the original question. Cain's wife was one of his sisters, or more probably a niece, or grandniece, or great-great-granddaughter, a direct descendant of Adam, born during those centuries in which the first family multiplied without pause. A real woman, with parents, with a history, with a name that the biblical text simply did not consider important to record because it was not the main point of the account. She was not created in secret. She was not an alien. She was not a pre-Adamic woman. She was not a mystical invention. She was his relative, a relative born at a time when the world was filling up with people, a relative he met in his exile, a relative with whom he had children and built a life. But now comes the uncomfortable part, because by this point your head is already processing something the modern mind instinctively rejects, and that is that we are talking about incest. Brothers marrying sisters, uncles with nieces, and that bothers you, and it bothered me too, until I understood something that changes the entire reading. Picture this scene. You're at a university. You're sitting in philosophy class, cold air conditioning, whiteboard with questions written in black marker. The professor looks at the 4 Christian students in the room and drops the question with a smile of victory he has rehearsed 1,000 times. If Adam and Eve were the first, and they only had 3 male children according to the Bible, who was Cain sleeping with? With his mom? With his sister? With who? Nervous laughter. Some students laugh. The Christians lower their heads. They don't know how to answer. They feel the weight of the stares. The professor thinks he won. He goes back to writing on the board. The class ends and nobody talks about it. They leave the room with a knot in their chest. And that night, one of those students is going to doubt for the first time whether everything he was taught in his church has any foundation. But that professor, without knowing it, just revealed 2 things. First, that he did not read Genesis 5. Second, that he is reading the ancient text with modern laws in his hand. And that, my friend, is a methodological error so serious it invalidates his entire question. It invalidates it not because the question is offensive. It invalidates it because he is using the wrong filter to evaluate the data. Because the laws against incest, the ones we know today, were not delivered by God until Moses in Leviticus 18. And Moses lived approximately 2,500 years after Adam. 2,500. We are talking about an abyss of time. Almost the same distance that separates Jesus Christ from us today. If you today judge someone from the year 1000 before Christ with the laws of the year 2026 after Christ, you would be committing the same error as the philosophy professor. You would be applying a legal code to an era in which that code did not exist. Before Moses, God had not prohibited marriages between close relatives. Why? Because biologically it was not yet a problem. According to the creationist reading of the text, human genetics was practically intact in those first centuries. Creationist scholars maintain that genetic mutations accumulated over time, generation after generation, and that only after the flood did problems begin to appear that today cause incest to produce serious diseases, malformations, neurological problems. Adam and Eve, according to this same traditional reading of the text, were created with a perfect genome, and their first descendants inherited that genome almost intact. But in those first generations, brothers could have healthy children with no documented biological problem. That is why Abraham, much later, married his half-sister Sarah. And God did not condemn him for it. Abraham himself confesses it to King Abimelech without guilt, without shame. Lot had children with his own daughters, and although the scene is murky and born of trauma, the text does not present God handing down a law against it at that moment. The prohibitions come later, when they were necessary to protect human health. When the population was so large that there was no longer a biological reason to marry relatives, and when the genetic effects of incest began to appear, applying Leviticus 18 to Genesis 5 is like judging a 16th century doctor for not using sterile gloves. The rules did not yet exist, science did not yet exist, the knowledge did not yet exist. And judging the past with standards of the present is the clumsiest, most anachronistic, most superficial way of reading history. If what you just heard made you uncomfortable, but made you think, write the words Genesis 5 in the comments. Not for anything mystical. It's so that you know where the answer is when someone asks you this question again. And so that the video reaches more people who need this clarity. People who at this very moment are doubting their faith because someone asked them a question like this and they didn't know how to answer. Let's continue. Because now comes a detail that almost no one notices. And this detail, a single phrase from Genesis 4, completely blows up the idea of the four people. A detail so big that when you see it, you will not be able to read this chapter the same way again. After Cain was expelled, after the curse, after he went off to the land of Nod, the text says something extraordinary. It says that Cain knew his wife she conceived and gave birth to Enoch. And then Cain did something no single person does. He built a city, an entire city, and he named it after his son. Stop, a city. Who lives in a city built by a single family? If Cain, his wife, and his newborn son were the only people, who was the city for? For the three of them, a city of 3 inhabitants. That is not a city. That is a hut, a campsite, a house in the middle of the desert. A city only exists when there is a population to inhabit it, and for a population to exist, there have to be many people, dozens, hundreds, thousands. Cain did not build a cabin, he built a metropolis, which means that in that generation, at that time, there were already enough humans on Earth to fill an entire city with inhabitants, enough to need organization, streets, houses, commerce, division of labor, and all those humans were descendants of whom? Adam, only of Adam. Because God only created one original couple, the entire human population of the planet in those first centuries was one single gigantic family expanding generation after generation. One single root, one single origin. But already in Cain's time, so many branches that they filled cities, and there is still more. Because a few verses later, the biblical text gives us another crushing proof that human civilization was already advanced in that generation. Cain's descendant Jubal was the father of all who play harp and flute. That is, there was organized music, developed instruments, artistic culture, people professionally dedicated to music, schools of apprenticeship, traditions transmitted from generation to generation. His brother Tubal-Cain forged all kinds of works of bronze and iron. That is, there was metallurgy, technology, metal commerce, workshops with furnaces, technical knowledge to smelt, mold, shape. And another brother, Jabal, was the father of those who dwell in tents and raise cattle. That is, there was organized livestock, nomadism, large-scale pastoralism, commerce systems between tribes. How do you think music, metallurgy, organized livestock, and city construction develop in a population of 3 people? They don't develop. They cannot develop. Music is not born in a family of 3. Metallurgy is not invented for the use of a single tribe. Cities are not built to be inhabited by a couple with children. What the biblical text is showing, without needing to shout it, is that a few generations after Adam, there was already an entire civilization, with trades, with arts, with technology, with social divisions, with division of labor. Cain's wife was one of those thousands of people, a young woman, daughter or granddaughter or great-granddaughter of Adam, probably born decades, perhaps centuries after Cain. Because there is another fact almost no one adds up. And here comes the second error of the question. The error almost no one has thought to question. The classic question is, where did Cain's wife come from? But the correct question is, when did Cain marry his wife? Because the biblical text never says that Cain killed Abel and the next day found a wife. That is an invention of our modern imagination, accustomed to reading stories in an hour, accustomed to movies in which everything happens fast, everything resolves in 2 hours, everything chains together without pauses. But the Bible does not work that way. The Bible leaps, the Bible compresses, the Bible narrates centuries in 1 phrase and minutes in 5 chapters. Between Abel's death and Cain's union with his wife, decades could have passed, perhaps a century, perhaps more. The text simply does not say. And when the text is silent about time, it does not mean that time did not exist. It means it was not relevant to the narrative purpose. Remember, these people lived almost 1,000 years. The concept of afterward in Genesis 4 does not mean the next day. It can mean many generations. It can mean an entire world changing between phrase and phrase. Verse 16 says that Cain went to the land of Nod. Verse 17 says that he knew his wife. Between those 2 verses, in historical reality, hundreds of years could have passed. The Bible simply does not bother to mark the pause. If Cain was, let's say, 100 or 200 years old when he fled east of Eden and wandered as a fugitive for another 100 years and settled in Nod, and by then a whole lot of new people had already been born. The wife he met could have been a woman several generations below him, his great-great-grandniece. A person he never knew as a child because she hadn't even been born when he was exiled. A person who discovered Cain as a character from the past, a marked man, a survivor of the first generation, a living legend of the family. Changes the whole picture, doesn't it? It is no longer the absurd image of Cain walking out of the garden, seeing a woman magically appear and marrying her in the next scene. It is a story of centuries, of a humanity that expanded while Cain lived out his exile, and of a marked man, wandering, who finally married someone born in a generation he had watched grow from afar, while he wandered with God's mark on his forehead. And the strongest part is still to come. Now picture another scene, a family WhatsApp group, Sunday night. After the family lunch, your cousin, the one who declares himself a Christian of questioning, the one who studied 1 semester of philosophy and thinks he's the next Nietzsche, launches a 3-line message with a mocking, laughing emoji. If the Bible is real, explain where Cain's wife came from. Spoiler, you can't. And that's why I no longer believe in that fairy tale. 20 people read the message. The phone screen lights up and goes dark in each home. Some laugh uncomfortably. Others feel a pinch in the chest. Others simply close the app. Nobody replies. Your aunt, the one who organizes the family lunches, deletes the message from the group half an hour later to avoid the fight. And the feeling hangs in the air that the cousin won, that the faith lost, that the Christians in the group had no argument. But the truth is the opposite. What your cousin does not know is that his question was refuted more than 3,000 years ago, in the very book he rejects. The answer is literally in the next chapter of the text he quoted to attack. It is written, waiting. Waiting for someone to read it, waiting for someone to cite it when the question is asked. He did not read Genesis 5. He did not do the math. He did not see the word daughters. He did not notice Adam's longevity. He did not pay attention to anyone who finds me from Cain's own mouth. He did not process the matter of the city. He did not consider the chronology. He did not study the development of civilization described in Genesis 4. He did not reflect on the Mosaic laws. He simply repeated an old meme, a question that has been circulating since the 18th century in atheist circles without investigating whether it had an answer. And this is the pattern. Almost every famous biblical contradiction circulating on the internet is like this. An argument that sounds devastating in one sentence and that dismantles in 30 seconds when someone actually opens the text. But the problem is that many Christians don't open the text either, and so they stay silent, and the lie gains ground, not because the lie is strong, because the truth did not defend itself. If that has happened to you, if at some point someone asked you a question like this and you didn't know how to answer, and you were left with a knot in your throat, feeling that your faith is naive, this video is for you, and for you to save and to share. Because there are thousands of people at this moment asking themselves this same question without anyone to answer them honestly. People who are one message away from closing the Bible forever. People who need to know that their faith has solid foundations, not mystical clouds. And now, yes, let's go to the ending. Because there is a deeper layer that almost nobody reaches, a layer in which everything we've talked about up to now changes meaning. The question of where Cain's wife came from is not really a question about ancient marriages. It is a question about how we read the Bible. It is a test, and most people fail it without knowing. They fail it because they don't know they are being evaluated. When someone reads Genesis 4 and gets stuck on Cain's wife, what that person is revealing is that they are reading the text as if it were a fairy tale with 4 characters. As if Genesis were a Disney story in which only what the narrator explicitly mentions matters. As if everything not said had not existed. As if ancient texts worked the same as a modern movie script, with every character introduced, every setting described, every relationship explained. But ancient Hebrew texts do not work like that. They are not novels. They are selective chronicles. The author mentions what is theologically important for his message and omits everything else. He does not name Adam's daughters because, in that patriarchal culture, genealogies ran along the male line, not because women did not exist, but because the purpose of the text was to trace the spiritual lineage up to a specific person, the promised Messiah. The entire genealogy of Genesis 5 points forward, toward Noah, toward Abraham, toward David, toward Christ. The women existed, they had daughters, they had entire lives, but the text only records the men because that is the line that carried the promise. And that is the true mystery hidden here. The text's silence about Cain's wife is not an error. It is a narrative decision. It was irrelevant information for the main purpose of the book. If Moses, when writing Genesis, had to record the name and genealogy of every woman and every son and every daughter of every generation, the book would have thousands of pages and nobody could read it. The selection is not dishonesty. It is good writing. It is good theology. It is good history. Picture for a moment someone in a hospital room, a father alone waiting for a diagnosis. The white fluorescent lights hurt the eyes. The smell of disinfectant mixed with cold coffee. He has not opened a Bible in years. But 6 months ago, a question began to follow him around. Could all that be real? Is there a God at the end? Does the faith of his mother, who scolded him so much in childhood, make any sense? And among the questions that keep him from coming back, there is one that an atheist friend repeats to him almost every week, in every conversation, with that smile of intellectual superiority. And Cain's wife, explain that to me. That night in the silence of the hospital hallway, that man searches on his phone. He doesn't even know what he's searching for. He just types the question that torments him. He finds a video. He starts to listen. And for the first time, someone explains to him, without shouting at him, without condemning him, without treating him like an ignoramus, that the question that was paralyzing him had an answer. That the text he was afraid to read was actually waiting for him, that faith was not naive, that he was not stupid for asking, that he had been deceived by arguments that dismantle with an honest reading. That happens every day. And that is why this kind of content matters. It is not abstract theology. It is not academic debate. It is a real person in a real hallway recovering a faith he thought was dead because someone finally gave him a clear answer to a question that for years no one could answer for him. But here is the last layer, the one almost nobody sees, the one that changes everything we have talked about today. There is a deep reason why the Bible does not bother to explain where Cain's wife came from. And that reason is that Cain's problem was never his marriage, it was his heart. The biblical text has theological priorities, not biographical ones. And what matters to the author is to show you something much bigger than a genealogical fact. Read Genesis 4 again with this lens. What the text dedicates space to explaining is not where the wife came from. It is the rejected offering, Cain's anger, God's warning about the sin that crouches at the door like a beast waiting to devour him, the murder, the curse, the mark, the exile. All of that receives entire verses, dialogues, detailed descriptions. What the text summarizes in a single line is the marriage. A single, cold, quick, mechanical line. Cain knew his wife, and she conceived and gave birth to Enoch. Why so little space? Because to God, who that woman was not the point. The point was that even in his exile, Cain was still receiving a form of grace. He had descendants. He built a life. He built a city. He had grandchildren and great-grandchildren who developed music, metallurgy, livestock. The curse was not annihilation. It was a mark on someone whom God was still protecting with his hand. A mark of exile, yes, but also a mark of protection. Did you catch that? Up until the end, after the worst crime, God was still sustaining Cain. Cain's wife is not a theological problem. She is proof of God's patience. She is the silent detail that shows that not even the first murderer was completely abandoned. That divine justice and divine mercy walk together. That punishment does not cancel grace. That even the worst sinner, in the biblical worldview, still receives the breath of life from the same God he offended. And if that idea makes you uncomfortable, good. It should make you uncomfortable, because it means there is hope for people who do not deserve it. It means there is mercy beyond what human justice would tolerate. It means the first murderer in history had grandchildren, great-grandchildren, a city built with his name, a lineage that lived for centuries. It means that you, reading this right now, with all the things you have done that no one knows about, you too are covered by that same patience. You too are still breathing. You too still have opportunity. Cain's wife was never the mystery. The real mystery was why God allowed him to have her, why God blessed, even partially, the life of a murderer, why God wrote in his sacred book the lineage of a cursed man without erasing it, why God still, to this day, sustains people who do not deserve it. And now you know. There is a video on the screen right now. It deals with exactly something I left unresolved today, the mark that God placed on Cain, what it was, why he placed it, and why no one could take it away. If you made it this far, what comes next is going to interest you.